The first thing I saw when I pulled into my own driveway was a bright orange notice taped to the front door. Property vacant. I sat there in my truck with my duffel bag still on the passenger seat, staring at those two words like they were written in some language I didn't understand. My boots were still dusty from the flight home. My uniform still smelled like airports, stale coffee, and the desert. And for a second, my brain refused to connect what my eyes were reading to the life I thought I was coming home to. I'd been gone for 9 months. 9 months of emails that got cut off, calls that dropped, video chats that froze in the middle of my wife's smile. 9 months of sand, heat, patrols, and counting down the days until I could walk back through my own front door and sleep in my own bed beside the woman I loved. Instead, I was looking at a warning that my house was vacant. I got out of the truck so fast, I nearly tripped over my own bag. The porch looked wrong immediately. No welcome mat, no flower pots, no little wind chime Mara used to insist on hanging every spring. The curtains in the front window were gone. The lock on the door had been changed. And taped right over the orange notice was another sheet of paper, white and official-looking, with a phone number and the words "Eviction follow up." My chest tightened. "No," I said out loud, like the house could hear me and change its mind. I banged on the door. "Mara!" Nothing. I tried the knob, even though I knew it was useless. It didn't move. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Then I did what every exhausted, half-shocked husband coming home from deployment does when the world suddenly stops making sense. I called the one number I knew by heart besides my wife's. My sister, Dana. She answered on the third ring, voice sleepy. "Eli, you home? Do you know why there's an eviction notice on my house?" Silence. The kind of silence that makes the blood rush in your ears. "What do you mean, eviction notice?" "I mean exactly that. There's an orange sign on my door. The locks are changed. And the yard looks like nobody's lived here in months." Dana exhaled slowly, and I knew before she said another word that something was terribly wrong. "Eli, I think you need to come to Mom's. My mom's dead, Dana." "I know," she said softly. "I mean, Aunt Ruth's. And please, just come here." Aunt Ruth lived 40 minutes away in a little 2-bedroom ranch house with a crooked mailbox and a garden that had never recovered after my uncle passed. She had taken me in more times than I could count, and when Mom died when I was 16, Ruth was the only one who made sure I didn't disappear into myself. I drove there with my jaw locked so hard it hurt. Every red light felt like an insult. Every mile felt like it was dragging my life into a deeper hole. When Dana opened the door, she looked like she'd already been crying. That was the first time I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a broken lock. It wasn't a bad contractor. It wasn't some stupid clerical mix-up. My wife had done something. "Where's Mara?" I asked. Dana wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's not here." "That's not what I asked." Aunt Ruth came into the hallway with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had the tired, sad face people get when they've been holding on to a secret they don't want to carry anymore. "Eli," she said gently, "sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want someone to tell me why a house I own says vacant." Dana looked at Aunt Ruth, then at the floor. And that was enough. I didn't sit. I heard Aunt Ruth take a breath. "Your house was sold." The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. "Sold," I repeated. "Yes," Dana whispered. I laughed once, but it came out sharp and ugly. No, it wasn't. I'm on the mortgage. I'm on the title. I would know if my house was sold. Aunt Ruth closed her eyes, like the truth was physically painful. "Mara said you signed papers." I stared at her, then at Dana, then back at Aunt Ruth. "I was in Iraq," I said slowly. "What papers?" Nobody answered. The world tilted. I felt it then. That sick little drop in my stomach, like the ground had opened under me and I just hadn't fallen all the way through yet. "Who bought it?" I asked. Dana swallowed hard. "A man named Gerald Haskins." I didn't know the name. Not yet. But I was going to. Mara and I had gotten married 6 years earlier in a small church on the edge of Cedar Hollow. The same town where I'd grown up learning how to fix trucks with my hands and keep my mouth shut when life got hard. Mara had been a bank teller then, pretty in a sharp, polished way that made people notice her before she said a word. I was a mechanic before I enlisted, and later, after I joined the Army, I came home between deployments and used every extra dollar I had to buy the house on Maple Street. It wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a narrow kitchen, a leaning fence, and a backyard that got muddy every spring. But it was ours. Or so I thought. Mara had always had expensive tastes she liked to pretend were modest. She said she just liked nice things. But there was always a new handbag, a new piece of jewelry, a new reason why we couldn't afford to save as much as I wanted. Still, I trusted her. I trusted her because when you leave your home and your family for months at a time, trust isn't optional. It's the thing that keeps you standing. And now that trust had turned into a pile of ash. I was back in my truck before Dana could say more. My hands shook so badly I missed the ignition twice. "Eli, where are you going?" Dana called after me. "To my house?" "No, don't." But I was already gone. When I got to Maple Street, the place was stranger than it had looked from the curb. The mailbox had been replaced. The porch light was different. There was a new SUV in the driveway, black and shiny and expensive enough that it looked like it belonged in another neighborhood. My house. Someone else's car. That anger was a clean, cold thing. It cut right through the shock. I marched up to the front door and hammered on it until it swung open. The man who stood there was in his 50s, with silver hair, a gold watch, and the kind of expression rich people wear when they're annoyed that reality has interrupted their afternoon. "Yes," he said, as if I were a salesman. "This is my house," I said. He gave me a bored little smile. "Not anymore." I stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" "Gerald Haskins." The name landed like a hammer. "I'm Ellie Mercer." He looked me over slowly, from my boots to my shoulders to the duffel bag hanging from my hand. "Ah," he said. "The husband." I stepped closer. "Where is Mara?" "In the backyard, I believe." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I pushed past him before he could stop me. The kitchen had been painted a beige I didn't recognize. The old table was gone. The family photos that had once hung by the hallway were gone too, all except one frame on the counter. I caught my own reflection in the glass and barely recognized the hard-eyed man looking back. Then I saw her. Mara was standing in the backyard near the shed, holding a glass of wine, wearing sunglasses like she was on vacation. She looked polished, rested. Not a single sign of the woman who used to cry quietly when my deployments got extended. She turned when she heard the back door open. The expression on her face wasn't surprise. It was irritation. "Eli," she said, "you're early." Early. That word hit me harder than any weapon ever had. "Why is there a stranger living in my house?" I asked. Her lips pressed into a line. "Because I sold it." The sentence was so casual, so perfectly calm, that for a moment I wondered if I'd heard her wrong. "You what?" She shrugged, then took a sip of wine. "I sold it." My ears started ringing. "I was deployed," I said. "You sold our house while I was deployed." "You weren't using it," she said. I laughed, and the sound scared even me. "Wasn't using it?" "Mara, it's our home." "Not anymore." I looked at her, waiting for the punchline, the apology, the explanation, anything human. But she just stood there with that little edge of impatience in her face, like I was the inconvenience, like I was making this more dramatic than it needed to be. Gerald Haskins came out behind me, hands in his pockets. "Your wife handled everything legally." I turned on him. "Shut your mouth before I put you through the fence." Mara's chin lifted. "See? This is exactly why I did it." "What?" "You always act like everything belongs to you just because you wear a uniform." I blinked at her, stunned by the cruelty of it. "What are you talking about?" She crossed her arms. "I'm talking about being tired, Eli. Tired of waiting. Tired of never knowing when you'll come home. Tired of living like a military widow while you're halfway around the world." I took a step toward her. "You could have told me you wanted a divorce." Her eyes flashed. "And let you drag this out? No, the house was the only thing worth anything around here. Gerald made a serious offer. The house is in both our names, I said. She smiled thinly. Not after the paperwork. Something in me went very still. What paperwork? Her gaze flickered, just for a second. That second told me everything. You forged my signature, I said. No, she snapped. Don't accuse me of that. You forged my signature. Her shoulders rose and fell once. I did what I had to do. That was when I realized she hadn't just betrayed me. She had rehearsed this. She had waited until I was out of the country. She had found a buyer. She had changed the locks. She had packed up my life and sold it off like used furniture. And she was standing there telling me I was the problem. Gerald folded his arms. Your wife said the house was hers to manage. I turned to him. Did she also tell you I was still alive? He gave me a little shrug, like he was too classy to be bothered by military husbands getting emotional. I bought a property with a clear title. You bought stolen property, he smirked. That's a strong accusation. I pointed at Mara. You knew I was coming home next week. I knew you'd be upset, she said. You sold our home. I sold an asset, she said. An asset I helped maintain. There it was, the final insult. I stared at the woman I had married and felt something inside me crack in a way I don't think fully healed for a long time. Where did the money go? Mara folded her wine hand around the glass tighter. Into an investment. What investment? Her mouth hardened. That's none of your business. I almost didn't hear the footsteps until a man's voice came from the side gate. Actually, it said, it's very much your business. A middle-aged man in a dark suit stepped into the yard carrying a leather briefcase. He had calm eyes and the kind of face that made you believe he had seen every kind of lie and already knew which one you were telling. He looked at me, then at Mara, then at Gerald. Which one of you wants to explain why a military spouse sold a jointly held home without the service member's written consent? He asked. Mara's face changed instantly. Who are you? Attorney Daniel Price. Gerald's smug expression disappeared. Mara, what is this? She looked at him, suddenly less certain than she had been a minute before. I didn't call him, she said. Price opened his briefcase. No. I was called by the county recorder's office when the filing on this property triggered an automatic review. There are some irregularities. Several, actually. My heart kicked hard. There was a title transfer? I asked. Yes, he said, handing me a folder. And a power of attorney document. I took the folder with numb fingers. The first page nearly made me choke. It had my name on it. My name, my signature, my rank. Only, it wasn't mine. It looked close enough to fool someone who didn't know me, but I knew the way I signed my name. I knew every curve of my own hand on paper. This wasn't me. Mara stared at the folder like it might explode. Price's voice remained calm. Who notarized this? Mara didn't answer. Gerald did. A mobile notary. We were told everything was in order. By whom? Price asked. Gerald hesitated. Just long enough. Bimara. I felt that answer before anyone said it. Price looked from one face to the next, and then at me. Sir, are you aware there may have been fraud in the sale of your property? Fraude. The word hit like cold water. Yes, I said. I'm aware now. Mara's voice sharpened. This is ridiculous. We needed money. For what? I demanded. She looked away. That was when I knew there was more. Always more. Cheaper lies hiding behind bigger ones. Price slid another sheet from the folder. There's also a second lien on the property. I frowned. What does that mean? It means someone took out a loan against the equity, he said. A very large one. I looked at Mara. She didn't meet my eyes. How large? I asked. Price glanced down. $240,000. The backyard went silent. My knees nearly gave out. 240,000? I repeated. Gerald looked stunned now, too. That was not disclosed. Mara's face finally cracked. It was for the business. What business? She laughed once, brittle and defensive. The business you never supported. I stared at her. What business, Mara? Her eyes turned hard. My boutique. I wanted to laugh again, because the absurdity of it was so complete, it almost made me dizzy. She had spent years talking about opening a boutique. She'd never had the discipline to do it, never saved enough, never followed through. Yet somehow, while I was sleeping in tents and eating heat-pack meals overseas, she had turned my house into a loan machine and sold it from under me to fund her dream. Gerald looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You told me the loan was for renovations, he said. She snapped at him. It was. No, Price said quietly. It appears the funds were transferred to an account labeled Larkwood Interiors, then dispersed to multiple personal expenditures. There were also payments to a consulting firm, a private school, and a luxury car dealer. A cold wind seemed to move through the yard. Private school, luxury car dealer, consulting firm. I turned slowly toward Mara. She lifted her chin, but her face had gone pale. Whose private school? I asked. She didn't answer. Whose school, Mara? Her silence was an answer. I felt something ugly and hot rise in my chest. Is there a child? Gerald snapped his head toward her. What child? Mara's eyes flashed with panic now. Don't. Is there a child? I asked again, louder this time. Her mouth trembled. Then she said the words that split my life in half. Her name is Lily. It took a second for it to register. Her, I repeated. A daughter, not Oris. I don't remember stepping backward, but I must have, because Price looked concerned. Sir? Mara was crying now. Not from guilt, not really. From exposure. From being caught with the version of herself she had hidden in the dark. How old? I asked. 6, she whispered. 6. I stared at her like she had become a stranger, wearing my wife's face. You had a child, I said slowly. While I was deployed, she flinched. It wasn't like that. Gerald looked between us with disgust beginning to replace his earlier arrogance. You told me you were separated. Mara turned to him. I was trying to fix things by lying to me, he barked. She snapped. You said you didn't care about details as long as the house was clean and the sale was fast. He went pale. Price's eyebrows rose a fraction. Mr. Haskins, did you know you were purchasing a property with an undisclosed, dependent living expense attached? I knew nothing about a child, Gerald said. Neither did I. Mara wiped at her face angrily. You weren't here. There it was again. The excuse she thought could cover anything. You had every chance to tell me, I said, my voice low and shaking. You had letters, calls, video chats. You had every opportunity. I was scared. Of what? Me? She looked up at me, tears and fury mixing together. Of being stuck, of waiting forever, of raising a child alone while everyone told me to be strong and patient and grateful. I almost said something cruel. Instead, I asked the question that mattered most. Is she mine? Mara froze. That 1 second told me more than any confession could have. Price noticed it too. Mara's voice came out small. I don't know. The yard seemed to tilt. I actually heard Gerald swear under his breath. Don't know, I said. It was around the time you were home on leave, before the last deployment, she said, crying harder now. It could be yours, Eli. It could. Could. She had built a life on a could. Something inside me went so cold I felt calm. You sold my house, I said quietly. Used my equity, hid a child, forged my signature, and you don't even know who the father is. That is not fair. I stared at her. Fair? I said. You want to talk about fair? For the first time since I came home, she looked afraid. The fear didn't comfort me. It just made me more certain of what had to happen next. Price cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, I need to advise you not to discuss this any further without formal representation. Good, I said, because I'm done discussing it with her. Mara stepped forward. Eli, please, we can work this out. I barked a laugh. Work it out? You sold the place I bled for. I did it for us. No, I said, you did it for yourself. Gerald rubbed a hand down his face. He looked like a man realizing his expensive purchase came with a catastrophe attached. I need to know exactly what I bought before I say another word. You bought trouble, I said. Price closed his briefcase. Actually, gentlemen, you may have all bought a legal nightmare. He looked at Mara with a coolness that made me believe he already knew she was guilty of something bigger than she admitted. There was a reason he showed up that day, and I would find out later that he hadn't been sent by the county office by pure luck. My sister Dana, thank God, had left a voicemail for her friend Cora in the county clerk's office after she found the notice. Cora had pulled the file, saw the forged signatures, and called in a real estate fraud attorney she trusted. Price had arrived just in time to stop a clean escape. Mara didn't know that yet. She just knew she was cornered. And cornered people always make mistakes. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed at Aunt Ruth's on her worn-out couch while my brain kept looping through the same image. Mara signing my name with a pen in one hand and a wine glass in the other, turning my home into money while telling me she was lonely. Dana sat with me at the kitchen table until nearly 3 a.m, explaining the parts she'd been too scared to tell me earlier. Mara had started changing after the last deployment, first with small things, then with bigger ones. She'd become defensive, secretive, always on her phone. People in town had seen her with Gerald Haskins more than once, though nobody had wanted to say it out loud to me. She had told people I was basically gone for good. She had implied I wasn't coming home, that the army had changed me, that she had to protect herself and the little one. The little one. My father had left when I was 8. My mother had died before I was old enough to understand half the lessons she tried to teach me. I had spent most of my life learning how not to feel abandoned. And now my own wife had decided to make me into the kind of man who disappears. By sunrise, I had called the base legal office, the local sheriff's department, and a real estate fraud investigator. I sent every document Price gave me, every photo, every text, every email. By noon, the county recorder had frozen the transfer pending review. By evening, Mara's new life was starting to fall apart. Gerald showed up at Aunt Ruth's while I was outside on the porch, trying to get my shaking hands to stop. He looked worse than he had the day before. Less smug, more betrayed. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stood but didn't invite him in. "You have 10 seconds. He gave a bitter little laugh. "Fair enough. I'm not the villain here." "No?" "No," he said. "I got played too." I believed him. That didn't make me like him. "I had no idea about the forged signature," he said. "If I had, I never would have touched the place." "You still bought a house from a woman whose husband was deployed," I said. "You didn't ask enough questions." His jaw tightened. "I asked what I thought mattered." "Money." "Yes," he said, and didn't pretend otherwise. "Money? But I didn't know she was using the proceeds for some private scheme." "Scheme?" He looked around like he hated the fact that he was standing in a poor neighborhood, admitting he'd been fooled by a woman he thought was beneath him in every way, except her ability to manipulate. She approached me because she knew I wanted a fast sale before the end of the quarter. She claimed you were gone, that the marriage was over, that the home was full of debt. She had letters, documents. She made it sound urgent. She forged those too, clearly. I studied him. "Why are you here, Gerald?" He hesitated. "Because I've got kids, adult kids, and a mortgage company, and a bank, and a lawyer, all asking questions. If this goes criminal, I'm dragged into it, and my name takes a hit. I'm offering to unwind the sale." A small part of me almost admired how quickly he shifted from arrogance to damage control. Rich men can smell trouble from a long way off. "You're offering because you're scared," I said. He didn't deny it. "Yes, good. And because I'm not heartless," he added. "I didn't know there was a child involved." That word again. Child. I looked at him and thought about the only thing that had kept me sane overseas. The idea that someone back home was waiting for me. Not just a wife, a family, a place to come back to. Now that family had become a weapon. "What happens to the little girl?" I asked. Gerald seemed genuinely uncomfortable. I don't know." That was the real answer for all of us. A week later, I stood in a county office under fluorescent lights, while lawyers argued around me, and I was told the sale could be voided because of the forged title documents and the fraudulent loan. Gerald wanted his money back. The bank wanted its money secured. The county wanted everyone to stop yelling in the hallway. Mara wanted mercy she had not earned. And me? I wanted truth. So I asked for a DNA test. That was the moment Mara broke, in a way I had never seen before. Not a dramatic movie breakdown. Something quieter, more horrifying. She sat across from me in a little conference room, with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water, and whispered, "Please, don't do that." "Why not?" "Because if it's not yours." Her voice stopped there. I said the rest for her. "Then what?" She shut her eyes. "That child is still innocent," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "So you were going to let me raise another man's child, thinking she was mine while you used my money to hide the truth. I was going to tell you." "When?" She cried then, but I was past the stage of believing tears. "Before this got out of hand," she said. "Before anyone got hurt." "Too late." The test was done. We waited 11 days. Those were the longest 11 days of my life. I slept at Aunt Ruth's, helped Dana with her broken sink, met with lawyers, and tried not to imagine the face of a little girl who had no idea her mother had built a house of lies around her. Mara stayed in a hotel after Gerald kicked her out of the property. The boutique she kept bragging about never existed beyond the LLC name and a stack of invoices she couldn't support. The consulting firm was her cousin's side business. The luxury car had been leased and then returned after 2 payments bounced. The whole thing was smoke held together by debt and desperation. And then the results came in. Not mine. The paper might as well have been a bomb. Mara sat across from me when I opened the envelope in Price's office. She knew before I did. Her face drained of color so completely she looked almost gray. I read it once, then again. Then I set it on the table. "She's not mine," I said. Mara started sobbing before I finished the sentence. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. "Who is the father?" I asked. Mara shook her head. "I don't know. You don't know that either. It was a mistake." I stared at her. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. This was a 6-year lie." Price slid the DNA result into a file. "Mr. Mercer, I need to ask something important. Do you want to pursue criminal charges?" Mara looked up so fast I thought she'd strain her neck. The room went silent. That was the real ending of every question she'd been hiding behind. Not whether she was sorry, not whether she loved me, not whether she had been lonely or scared or desperate, whether she would face consequences. She reached for me across the table. I didn't move. "Eli," she whispered, "please." I looked at her hand and felt nothing. Then I thought of the nights I'd called home from overseas and heard a child's voice in the background. I had assumed it was neighbor noise, TV noise, life noise. I had heard a little girl laughing in my own house while my wife was telling me everything was fine. I thought of my mother working double shifts after my father left, never stealing, never lying, never turning hard because life was unfair. I thought of every soldier I'd served with who came home to a marriage or a family changed beyond recognition, and how they had still deserved the truth. "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." Mara made a sound like I had hit her. Price nodded once, already preparing the paperwork. Gerald's lawyer later called it a perfect storm of marital fraud and financial manipulation. The sheriff called it a pile of felony-grade nonsense. The county called it fraudulent conveyance. I called it what it was, betrayal with a mortgage attached. Mara was arrested 2 days later. It happened outside the hotel while she was trying to get into a rideshare with one suitcase and a mascara-streaked face. The deputy read her rights while reporters gathered at the edge of the parking lot, drawn by the kind of scandal small towns feast on. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. By then I had already signed the restraining order, the fraud complaint, and the divorce petition. The house sale was voided. Gerald got his money back from the bank after the title insurance fight started. The forged documents were traced back to a notary who had been paid in cash through Mara's cousin's company. The second lien was reversed after investigators proved the loan proceeds had been diverted into personal accounts. Dana's friend at the county clerk's office uncovered the first trail that made the whole case fall apart. Mara's attorney tried to negotiate. He argued stress, deployment separation, postpartum trauma, financial pressure. None of it erased the forged signatures, the false filings, the diverted funds, or the child concealment. The judge didn't care how pretty the excuses sounded. The evidence was too clean. By the time sentencing came around, the woman who had once stood in my backyard sipping wine like a queen was no longer a queen of anything. She got prison time, restitution, and a permanent criminal record that would follow her far longer than the headlines. But the story did not end there. Because of Lily, the little girl, I asked for supervised contact after the first court hearing, not because I had any legal obligation, but because I had seen her in one of the brief custody room photos attached to the case file, and she had a face too open to be punished for her mother's sins. She had dark curls and big, confused eyes. She looked like a child who had already learned that adults lie. We met in a family services room with soft chairs and ugly beige walls. She climbed onto the edge of the couch and stared at me like I was a stranger who had been mislabeled. "You knew my mommy?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Yes. Did you live with us?" "For a little while," I said. She nodded, accepting the answer with the blunt logic only children have. Then she asked the question that nearly brought me to my knees. "Are you mad at me?" "No," I said immediately. "Never." She watched me for a long second, then offered me half her cookie. I took it. That was the moment the anger in me shifted. Not into forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But into something more useful. Something steadier. Justice had come for Mara the way it sometimes does in real life. Slow and document-heavy and humiliating instead of dramatic. There was no grand speech, no single punch, no cinematic collapse. Just paperwork, hearings, arrests, and the steady weight of consequences. As for me, I got my home back, but I didn't move back into it right away. I spent weeks repairing the damage. I had the curtains replaced, the locks changed again, the backyard cleaned up. Dana helped paint over the beige walls Mara had chosen. Aunt Ruth brought over old family photos to replace the empty frames. The kitchen smelled like fresh paint and coffee and, eventually, hope. Gerald came by once after the dust settled. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, and told me he was sorry for his part in all of it. He admitted he had been arrogant enough to think he could buy certainty. He couldn't. No one can. I believed his apology about as much as I believed his earlier confidence, but I respected that he'd shown up. Before he left, he said something I didn't expect. "You know," he said, looking at the house, "I thought I was rescuing her from a bad marriage." I said nothing. He nodded slowly. "Turns out I was just buying into a lie." "Yeah," I said. "You were." He left with that. I kept my distance from Mara after sentencing. The divorce was ugly, but it was clean by the end. No reconciliation. No second chance. Some betrayals don't deserve a bridge back. But I did something I didn't expect to do. I wrote Lily letters. Not to confuse her. Not to claim anything I didn't have. Just letters about the weather, the garden Ruth used to keep, the old oak tree in the backyard, the way some people mistake control for love and call it family. When she was older, if she ever wanted them, I wanted her to know one thing. Her life did not begin with her mother's lies. It began with her own humanity. And mine. A year later, I stood on my repaired porch at sunset with a cup of coffee in my hand and watched. Aunt Ruth sat in a lawn chair with a blanket over her knees, pretending not to smile at the chaos. The house was mine again, but not in the way I once meant it. Not because of walls, not because of title deeds, not because of a mortgage that could be signed, stolen, or reversed. It was mine, because I had learned the difference between possession and peace. The army taught me how to survive ambushes, bad weather, and exhaustion. It never prepared me for the quieter war waiting at home, the one fought with signatures, secrets, and family members who look you in the eye while burying the knife. But I survived that too. And in the end, the woman who tried to erase me from my own life lost everything she thought she could control. The house was returned, the money was traced, the lies were exposed, the child was protected. The truth, once it finally stood up, did not apologize to anybody. That night, just before dark, Lily visited with her foster aunt for supervised drop-off. She ran up the walkway and stopped at the bottom step, looking up at me with that same serious little face. "I heard this is your house," she said. I smiled a little. "It is." She considered that. "Does that mean you live here?" "Mostly." She nodded like she approved, then pointed at the porch light. "It's pretty. It is now." She smiled, and for the first time I saw something in her that felt like a beginning instead of an ending. And maybe that was the real karma of it all. Not just that Mara lost her freedom, her reputation, and the stolen life she built on someone else's sacrifice. Not just that Gerald got dragged into the mess he paid to ignore. Not just that the papers and courts and investigators did their job. It was that I came home expecting to find a wife and found a battlefield. Then I fought my way out of it without becoming the kind of man who only knows how to destroy. I kept the house. I kept my name. I kept my peace. And the one person in that entire wreckage who had no part in the betrayal got a chance at a better life because, in the end, someone had to choose justice over revenge. I chose both, where it mattered. And when I finally sat down in my own living room again, with the repaired walls around me and the quiet settling in like a blanket, I understood something simple and hard-earned. Sometimes coming home is not the end of the war. Sometimes it is the place where the truth finally wins.